goddamn Kryll. How are you doing, everybody? Welcome to another Thursday. It lights up, by the way. I think I've showed it before, but I don't think I've ever, truly, shown off everything. It lights up. This Lancer is fully, a straight-up Lancer. So, I've got the flashlight I was going to use, but it seems that everything else comes out pretty well without it. So, yeah, we are going to talk about some Kryll today. My lighting is decent enough. So, we're talking about Kryll here on Gear Talks. The Gear Talks are every other Thursday at 5 o'clock. I'm happy you're all here. I'm happy we can all spend this time together. You might be wondering why I went for the dark aesthetic altogether in general. Obviously, for the Kryll, they're in the dark, all of that, yada yada. For anyone who's been around for a while, you'll know that back in the day, years and years and years ago, one of the first videos I did for Gears of War was about the Holo in general. Now, for the Holo video, I believe for that video I had all the lights off completely except one singular flashlight. That was the entire video. So I figured, let's do it again, because it just so happens the breeding grounds for the Kryll are also in the Holo. And the Kryll are also nighttime nocturnal creatures that come out during the night to feast and kill us all. Now, talking about the Kryll, we're just going to have to just talk about them this is the Discovery Channel, basically. Animal Planet. So, when it comes to the Kryll, basically, they're small bat-like creatures. They're kind of a little different than bats. They're not really formed the same. They're basically flying piranhas. Now, what they have on the wiki here, we get about 1 to 3 inches is about how big they are. So about yay big you'll normally see when flying. Now that sounds about right for the largest they can get, but if we're talking minimum, about yay and average about yay, the game really does paint it that they're a lot bigger. I'm willing to believe for dramatic effect in the games it looked like that, or the math might be wrong for their size, but these things in general are deadly. They're death incarnate, basically. That's what the Kryll are. The Kryll are basically this is what is going to deal with the mass amounts of enemies we're dealing with on a given daily basis for the locusts. So if night has come, the Kryll come out, and normally how it goes is the food chain will go human, then locust, because we do notice, and it's stated the humans are the first go-to, they must taste better, and then you have the locusts that are next up. I'm assuming just because humans, on the surface, there's just more of them are everywhere, probably taste better, easier to chew through instead of the hard skin of a locust. That's probably what it looks like for them. They are one of the most powerful forces, one of the most broken forces the locusts have ever brought out to the battlefield, because during the day, they're not there, but during the night, the entire skies are filled with them. There are millions. Now, it is also stated that later on in the war, around 12 AE-ish, it's stated, they have risen in number, probably because not only are they on the surface and feeding, there's a lot more food, and they return to the Holos where they breed. The Holos is where they call home. The Holos is also where their breeding is done. This is where basically the entire species thrives and lives, and at night they leave to go and hunt topside. That is how they pretty much operate. Just like in Animal Planet, kind of with nocturnal creatures. They're going to find somewhere that's dark and away from everything, and then during the night, they'll go out to the bigger areas of the world. The Kryll are creatures that they were so broken, basically, in-game, so they were so busted for how they worked, story-wise, that when 2 came around, they basically found a way to write them out completely. They said the light mass bomb from 1 eradicated all of them. Most of them. We'll touch on that. And that's why we're not seeing them anywhere. Surprise, okay, we don't have to deal with locusts in dark areas. So that's what their go-to is. Now, lore-wise, they do state, hey, after the light mass bomb went off in the Holo near Timgod is where they called home for their breeding grounds. It hit there, wiped out their breeding grounds, and the majority, if not close to all of them, were wiped out and killed. So, here's how I see it. Just like what I've talked about when it, came to how the locusts were supposed to be wiped out completely. People don't understand how hard it actually is to eradicate an entire species. And don't get me wrong, humans are very good at doing that. We've done it with many things that are extinct currently. But to do it takes so much time and work. You don't just throw one bomb in and all of them are gone, period. It doesn't work like that. Unless you're blowing up a planet, it don't work. Look at Warhammer with the orcs. For instance, Warhammer 40k, they go and populate planets. You blow up a planet, that does not stop them all. No, there's that many. When it comes to the Locust, when the Adam's machine went off, you're not going to wipe out all of them. There's going to be some left behind. That is where we have Lonnie and the Brash Brigade, where they come into play. When it comes to the Kryll, you can't just throw one bomb into the Hollow and expect it to be done. It is stated the Hollow is bigger than just one area on the planet. The Hollow is like under the entire like surface. It's kind of bigger in areas like Nexus is obviously a lot of stuff going on, and then there's the outer hollows where the Locust really haven't traversed that much. It's stated the Locust as a species is less than 100 years old, so they haven't gone throughout the whole planet, but they do have areas. I don't believe the Locusts, came across one area of Kryll and like, oh, this is where all the Kryll come from, and it just so happens that's what happened. No. The Kryll have to be other places. One bomb took out a big breeding area. There have to be others somewhere. Like, Mr. and Mrs. Krillerson must have went off with their 2 girls and 1 boy Kryllites, the little ones, and they're like, oh, hey, this looks like a nice little nesting area out in the suburbs. Let's stay here. And when the Lightmass bomb went off, they're like, oh, dang, it's a good thing we don't live there. What I'm saying is, I don't think all the Kryll were destroyed. I think it is also talked about, it's hinted at by, like, Prescott, everyone else, like, in-game, because Prescott talks about it later on in the books. Most of, if not all of the Kryll are dead. Even he knows, like, all of them could be gone, but there's a good chance it's the majority. What I'm trying to say here is that there's enough gone, it's not a problem for humanity anymore. Touching on this area of things, we might as well talk about what the Kryll also were capable of doing. Not only were they just swarming the areas at night, there were ways to kind of manipulate, control, and basically like have the Kryll work for the Locust in ways that humans didn't really think were possible. For instance, the Kryll grenade exists. This was a device that was basically like a juvenile form of a nemesis inside of like a casing. You would throw it, the smoke would plume out, and nearby Kryll would go into this swarm and they'd kind of call it home. So anything that was in the smoke basically got annihilated and shredded to pieces. When I said they're basically teeth, there are millions if not billions of these things. The piranhas you see on Discovery Channel and Animal Planet, how they tear apart everything to nothing but bone, they also do that. But they eat the bone also. They fly off and just keep killing. That is what they do. So if you go into the smoke, they go in, eat, and they make a dash for it so they're not harmed by the light. The light, by the way, is what is their main weakness. Anything involving sunlight or ultraviolet rays end up killing them. They burst literally into flames. They are that much of a cave-dwelling species that they don't deal with the light at all. They go in at night, they come out at night. That's all they deal with. So when the light hits them, they're done. When the light mass bomb hits, it is a light mass bomb. It killed all of them. Most of them, if not all of them. When it came to the damage that was done, yes, there could have been others in the planet, but that was so bright, even everything on the outer limits probably got hit. So things far away probably were still fine, but not by much. Other than the Kryll grenade, there was one other method that the Locust always used the Kryll for, and that is what we talk about when it comes to the story of Alima and for Zeta Squad, the Kryll Storm. Now, Kryll Storms are not just an isolated incident, they can happen other places. Basically, how the Kryll Storm works is, you have an area that you get seeders and shoot up enough nemesis to ink the entire sky, creating a simulated night, and that's when the Kryll pile into this one area, this one dome of darkness, and they just eradicate everything inside of it. It's such a big problem, and a strategy the Locust used quite a bit, that the COG made it a point that if there is signs of a Kryll storm, the entire town has to be evacuated. There's no hiding inside the town. There are so many Kryll condensed in this area, it is a literal just mosh pit of death. You have to evacuate and leave, and that's what happens with the evacuation of Alima. They have to get everyone out because there's a Kryll storm. There's no reason trying to fight everyone here. We have to get people out. We can't fight the Locust. Just get out. Just leave. That's all we're doing. And they narrowly escaped from Alima. This has happened other times. It's mentioned in Judgment for Halvo Bay that it was going on, but by the look of it with how bright the city was, especially in the beginning with the trees on fire, and some of the areas you visit, it does seem like certain parts of the city, not the whole city, because Halvo Bay was a large city. It was a very large touristic and rich, like, upper crust kind of area. So when it got hit, it was probably just different pockets, not the whole area. It's mentioned in Gears of War, in the original Gears of War, like, oh, a Kryll storm's going on, like, at the end when you're towards Timgod. but I don't really consider that one. Like, if you look at Halvo Bay, what they were talking about, and definitely Alima, I consider that a Kryll storm. So that was just one way that they tactically used them. Again, anything in there was eradicated. The Locusts also understood that. They didn't have to, like, leave in different areas up top. They could just go back underground and they're fine. Again, they always targeted humans first, the Kryll did. Locusts were always, like, secondary. If there was nothing else on the menu and Locusts were around, we're eradicating them. That's how it always went. Finally, the last thing we'll talk about when it comes to the Kryll is they also have the ability to be controlled. We don't know how exactly this is done. Like, this is not even like weaponry or like simulating night. Like actual telepathy, I control you. The only two instances we ever saw of this was the unidentified Theron that we've spoke of and General RAAM himself. We don't know how they can do it, but there is a way to have the Kryll actually be subservient to you, to the point where they will put their own lives on the line. It seems like with the Kryll, it might be like a hive mind scenario, because it does seem like with that many of them, if you're able to control them, they're like working as one. When they shield RAAM, for instance, they just cover him. And whenever there is a bullet, torque bow, explosion, anything, they take the brunt of the damage. They take it. If you try to hit RAAM in the first Gears of War game with his Kryll around him, it does not harm him. My thought process for that is that they're synced so well, and there's so many of them, any bullet flying in is going to hit a Kryll, and it just stops it right there. The Krill's dead, the bullet ain't going any further. That's my thought. So, hypothetically, if you brought out like a Mulcher, for instance, or like a Trigun, if the Triguns were around back then, they weren't, you could just unload, and sooner or later, you would have to go through enough Kryll to hit RAAM. That's what I'm thinking. There's not like a barrier or anything built around him. It's just Kryll. So, I don't know, maybe if you just pump enough lead, that's the answer. So, it's either they aren't subservient to you and they'll kill you, light from the day, UV lights, or a shitload of bullets. That's my guess on how you defeat the Kryll. That's the only way. But we don't have to worry about that anymore, especially from after 1 all the way to the current story, because after the Light Mass Bomb, basically there's nothing left. Is there ever going to be a return of the Kryll? That is very hard. It seems like in the current story, the blood leeches that are currently taken over by the Swarm, they're working as like the pseudo-Kryll. Not as dangerous. The Kryll, nothing beats the Kryll. I'm sorry, in the entire Gears of War story, there's nothing that was deadlier. Even a Berserker, I'm certain out at night, a Berserker could get killed by enough Kryll. There were enough. There had to have been. There are literally millions to billions of Kryll that would come out on the surface at night. I think anything would die to it. Unless you had, like, unless Baird specifically created, like, a robot that was like a juggernaut, maybe that would do it, because we don't know how they would interact with DBs. My assumption would be is I don't think they would harm DBs, or at least they would try and quit after a while, realizing it's not food. Because they did it mainly for food. They were hunting. They wouldn't go up to robots, taste metal, and be like, oh, we can't eat metal, we're not going to do that. So maybe the DBs were the one answer to the Kryll problem, but we weren't even close to DB tech at this point. If they returned, it's possible. If they were able to breed enough that they could actually have a swarm again, we already have one swarm, but a Kryll swarm, make a Kryll storm, a pseudo one, maybe it could work, but they're never going to reach the numbers that they had originally. Again, when they left the surface for the first time, and we don't even know how long they were around, we don't know if the Locust brought them or if humans already knew about the Kryll. Obviously not as bad as during the Locust War, but it seems like maybe they knew about the Kryll, maybe not, because the Kryll, they weren't as large a problem in the beginning. They were a problem, but like we could figure it out. By like almost close to the end of the war before the Light Mass Bomb, their numbers boomed. Imagine all the food they ate and all the reproduction. They probably went up just a dozen-fold. It's nuts if you think about it. Like, there's the story, and we're going to get a little real life here, but you'll understand. The story of, like, when field mice or, like, cats were introduced into, I think it was field mice originally and then cats. Because there was such a high abundance and problem with field mice in Australia, they brought cats in. The only problem is the cats also reproduced to this large, exuberant amount. So now cat hunting in Australia is just like a normal thing. People go out and hunt cats just for fun because there's so many of them. I I don't know how I feel about that because I am a pet owner with a cat. So I don't think I'd be going out and being okay hunting things knowing it's related to sage. So maybe I'll stay away from that. But that's one of the things. Like, things got so exponentially from growth, from like a large area, food being plentiful, that the numbers just boomed. In Minnesota, that's a thing too. Like, the deer populations will fluctuate. The wolf population depends on that. If there's a large influx of deer and there's no wolf hunting going on, the wolves will start to exponentially populate. That's just how it works up here for us. So I think that'll do it talking about the Kryll. Really a real cut and dry kind of thing. It was a very simplistic idea to have the Kryll. Just these creatures at night, you can't do anything to fight them off. They just exist. Good luck. And then when we get to 2, they're like, okay, if the premise is going underground into the hollow, the Kryll might become a problem. Because that's where they live. So I think at that point, everyone in the Gears of War team, they kind of just thought, you know, maybe we should write them out because it seems like this could be a really big problem. So I want to imagine, I do believe that's the reason that they're gone now, or at least most of them are. That's the Kryll for you. So I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank everyone for making this possible, and thank the patrons for making this possible. Next week, we have another video coming out. In 2 weeks, we'll have another Gear Talk video. That'll be another character. Another poll will be up on the community page and on Twitter. I don't really plug the community page as much as I do for Twitter now and then. But yes, the community page on YouTube also has voting for things. Every other month we have voting for a new game that'll be played. What will it be? You know, will it be a game from the past? Will it be a Final Fantasy? We have a ton of those. You know, I put up when we're going to be streaming. I put up a lot of things on the community page. I really like it, and it seems like people do too. Twitter will always be there, don't get me wrong. It has gotten me this far. Twitter's still going to be here, but combined, I think it makes a good team, and it gets me a good amount of numbers I need to decide what happens next from just a person perspective on what the individual or group wants. So, again, thank y'all. I am going to go and light up my handy-dandy trusty chainsaw bayonet Lancer Mark II, and I'm going to go find the light. So, thank y'all. I love y'all to death. Later!